Good evening and welcome to another edition of Talking Sports with Evan. I'm Evan Witallison, joined by friend of the show, Matt Carroll, coming back to join us once again. And last time we talked is right before the season, and now we're over the halfway mark of the season. How things been going?
Good. Outside of baseball as well, life is good, and Brewers' life is good too. Sneaking up, finally back up on the Cubs for the NL Central Division lead. Haven't quite gotten there yet, but have gained way more of that ground back. So yeah, we're in the thick of stuff now.
Yeah, we're definitely in the thick of it here. As I mentioned, about halfway through the season, Brewers down 1-0 against the Mets right now, but still a lot of baseball left to play. But before we do get started, I know I had the scroll going at the bottom and let people know where they can find your work.
Yeah, still doing some MLB writing over at justbaseball.com. Site that is growing every day, it seems like. So we've got more and more super talented writers coming over there. So if you're a fan of any team, absolutely check that out. Over at Athlon Sports as well these days, the duo is back together. Myself and Dave are putting out Brewers content for Inside the Brewers. And then the two of us still host the Cold Brew podcast as well. We are coming up on our 200th episode. We were actually 3 episodes away from that, so about to hit a big milestone. Trying to get a couple of guests for these last few before we get there. So always every week or every other week or so on Tuesday mornings we release it. It all just depends on whether the Brewers are in town and Dave's actually out there covering the game. So yeah, that's where I'm all over the place these days.
Yeah, and I always enjoy checking out your stuff wherever it may be. Well, Brewers 10 games over 500 going into tonight. Are they at, above, or below expectations when you were looking at the Brewers coming out of spring training?
I think I would say at. Like I was feeling pretty good about them coming out of the spring, not necessarily thinking they'd put up Dodgers numbers, but certainly not uncompetitive. I figured they were going to be very similar to the year before. We know we had seen a couple of pitchers go down at that point already, but by and large, the offensive core, most of the offensive core was coming back, so it seemed like they'd still be able to, compete the way that they did last year. Started off well, hit kind of a bit of a swoon there in May especially, but bounced back big in June, and now they're sitting a little bit behind the Cubs, and I don't think that's necessarily anything to be ashamed of right now. The Cubs have been way better this year than last year. They're absolutely loaded with firepower. They are competent pitching wise, and so to be a couple games behind the Cubs is okay, especially considering how rough the Brewers were at times in May. So I think they're right about where I thought they might be at this point, and with what they have and with what they've shown during kind of their high points during the season, absolutely think that they are on track for another playoff berth.
You mentioned a little bit of a swoon in May. What really stood out to you during that swoon? That anything that made you think that, wow, the season's going to get away from us, or were you still pretty confident that this team can flip that switch and turn that corner pretty soon?
I wasn't really getting up or down, I guess, at that point, because it's wise man named Seth Everett, who used to be on The Fan here in Milwaukee all the time as a guest, in its good old days, would always say, never look at the standings before Memorial Day. Nothing matters really before then. You can't really. Yeah, if you're just god awful, like Rockies awful, maybe you can already play your way out of contention by that point. But for the most part, no one has earned themselves a playoff berth or earned themselves, an elimination by that point. But I was a little curious as to what this Brewers offense truly was, because last year's offense really was one of the better ones they'd had in a long time. And you saw, kind of some newer faces there. Obviously, Joey Ortiz was new. Hoskins, who actually didn't have, one of his best years. Terang was a little bit better than normal. Frelick was in his first year. Contreras, not first year, his first full year, I want to say. Contreras, really broke out. So when they kind of swooned in May this year, is like, well, was last year a semi-illusion, or are they just on a cold streak? Because really, they had come out of most of April as one of the better offenses in the league. And sure enough, June hits, and they knocked that run per game average right back up to kind of where it was at the beginning of the year. So I was kind of in wait and see mode at that point. It's like, okay, was last year an illusion, or is this an illusion? And it seems like they've gotten back to what we know they can do. Now the question is, are they this year going to be an inconsistent offensive team versus last year that was actually very consistent? You never really felt like last year's Brewers were out of a game, and I didn't get that feeling with this Brewers team until really recently.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that the offense and the team itself really started to turn things around when Yelich really turned it around. I think right before Memorial Day, if I'm not mistaken, he was batting in the 100s, and it just didn't look very good. For the last 15 games, he's at 349, 397, and 635. In the last 30, roughly the time frame, they turned around, batting about 345 with 8 home runs and slugging 605 with a 405 on base. What have you noticed about Yelich during this stretch? I know the last week he's not been the Yelich from the 30 games prior, but like, what have you noticed with Yelich since he's really turned it around? Anything in particular with him?
I mean, the biggest thing to me is that he's lifting the ball. When he was, kind of at his low point this year, he was hitting just an insane amount of balls into the ground. Like he was close. I thought it was close to a 60% ground ball rate, which is egregiously high. Even for Yelich, it was at that point, I think, the second highest he'd had since his sophomore season with the Marlins. So he just was not lifting anything at that point. And now he's hitting line drives. He's obviously hitting balls up into the air. And when he is, a lot of them are going out of the park. And so he finally seemed to kind of just feel comfortable enough to start driving the ball into the air. And once that started happening, you would see him kind of spray the ball everywhere. When he's really comfortable, he's hitting the ball to the opposite field as well. But he's also pulling when necessary. He looks so much better because he's not just hitting rounders. When Yelich had really kind of started to slump after his knee injury in 2020 and 2021, before he finally started to find himself again in 2022, his ground ball rates were very high. He just was not getting as much into the air as he should. And so now that he's kind of switched that back around again, he was honestly, if Juan Soto hadn't had just an insane month of June, I wouldn't have been surprised if Yelich would have come away with NL Player of the Month. But I looked at the stats between the two, and I was like, all right, I'll give it to Soto for this one. He was really good, but Yelich was fantastic in June.
Do you think part of that could be, as we know, he had off-season back surgery, kind of worked his way back in the spring? You think part of it was just get comfortable with the back finally feeling good? Like he didn't really know how it was going to feel if he was the Yelich pre-back surgery, and now he feels good and he's able to get back to that form. You think that has a bunch to do with it too?
I wouldn't doubt that at all. I think that's similar to kind of what happened when he was going through some of the really bad back issues in the early 2020s. He comes back from his knee surgery. He's, seems a little bit tentative then, but then he kind of has some of those back problems. And it felt like it took him a while in 22 and 23 to kind of fully put that behind him once he was far enough removed from the injured list before he started looking better, and he would progressively get better and better and better. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if kind of a similar thing happened this year as well, because that is your support. Anyone listening who's had back problems, I've had them myself in the past. Like it can be debilitating, and we're not professional athletes putting that much just absolute like torque on our bodies like Yelich is. So I can imagine it is really bad for him coming back from it too. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that had a big effect and led to more of an adjustment period as well.
Other things that kind of happened during the turnaround is there is a good stretch too around the same time Yelich is struggling. That side of the infield, not good. Not
Mm-hmm.
getting on base, not producing and key opportunities when there are guys on base. Again, since Memorial Day ish, Joey Ortiz and Caleb Durbin have been two of the best hitters in that lineup.
Mm-hmm.
What do you take away from them in regards to figuring things out right there?
Well, Caleb Durbin, I think it's, this is his first year in the major leagues, so it's a little bit of that getting comfortable with major league pitching. He was great down there in AAA, but we know there's obviously a difference between the minors and the majors. I think with him, it was really kind of getting used to the spotlight and getting used to the talent in the major leagues. And it took him some time to kind of come around, but eventually he did, and he's looked a lot more solid since then. With Joey Ortiz, we saw that he can, come up with big hits last year because he was, pretty, right around there, average to a little above average in hitting it. And for if you were going to get that out of a shortstop position, that's actually good. Like we were spoiled to get what we got out of Willie Adames while he was here because shortstop position isn't generally one that traditionally has a lot of offense coming out of it. And so had Ortiz brought last year's production to that position, you would have been fine with that. But he was awful to start there's no way around it. He was awful to start the season on offense. But I think it was, those Brewers coaches really, really, really worked with him and got him comfortable. And I also wonder if the shift to shortstop, and I know shortstop was originally his position, but he had spent so much time at third and kind of was moved around a little bit as he was working his way, even with the Orioles, to a permanent position. I wonder how much the pressure of being that guy now at shortstop defensively and getting used to that position, because he had his moments there at the beginning of the season too that weren't the greatest defensively at shortstop. I wonder if as he settled into that position, that just overall weight off of his shoulders helped him in the batter's box as well, that he just kind of, felt maybe a little bit more comfortable overall, just as a player at that point. And maybe that allowed him to be in a good headspace at the plate. Who knows?
Before we go to pitching, one guy got to see, get your thoughts on, and if this is the type of year he was going to be having. But I know the running joke, which isn't really a joke anymore on social media, is this being the summer of Sal. And Sal Frelick has just produced anywhere in that lineup. And since becoming the leadoff hitter, he's produced even more, where they got his average hovering around 300, and he just keeps getting on base. And he has a leadoff home run the other day in the second pitch of the game. What have you noticed about him? I know he put on some muscle over the off season, and people were joking he might hit 15 to 20 home runs, but we're not getting that power. But we are seeing a very productive Sal Frelick at bat, and then we're still getting that Gold Glove style defense.
Yeah, he's looked fantastic this year. And even like he's looked good at multiple positions in the batting order, but he's really flourished, like you said, as he's been in the leadoff spot. And that in turn has actually helped Terang look a lot better since he switched down to about the 5 spot. Like he was on a long hitting streak there in the middle of the month too. But with Sal, I think, adding a little bit of muscle helped. I think for those young guys, the more and more experience you gain in the major leagues, the more comfortable you feel and the more confident you feel. And I think that just adds to everything for those guys. And yeah, Sal, he's popped a few homers out there. He's got a new career high with, I think, what's he at now? 5, I think, for the season. Not that we expected him, to have a ton for the guy that he is.
From last year.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll take it at this point. But I don't know. Like, I haven't noticed necessarily anything with his approach that's different, but he's just looked great as a leadoff hitter, and it's helped the Brewers lineup as a whole.
Probably just more comfort too, as his second
Yeah.
year. Probably a little more comfort level there as well. And moving on to pitching, Jacob Mizorowski, 3 great starts, and then yesterday happened. So for those that are listening later on, this is July 3rd and July 2nd. He had a rough inning in the second
Mm-hmm.
inning against the Mets, giving up his first runs as a big league pitcher. Starting with the good, what was working with Jacob Mizorowski? I think you and I've even had conversations about one of the big issues he has to work out is the command and the control.
Mm-hmm.
What was working during those first 3 starts? And then yesterday, not only the runs scored and giving up the 2 home runs, but his velocity seemed to go down as well as the game went on. Can you start with the good and then kind of what happened yesterday?
Yeah, I think the big difference between the games that he dominated, the first 3, and then yesterday was a couple things. One, you mentioned it, the velocity. Like, it's when he's throwing 102, 101. I mean, that for any major leaguer, that is just hard to catch up to. And he's tall. He has a very far forward release point, which makes 102 maybe look like 105 even, which is just terrifying to think about. But he also has like one of the more fearsome sliders. When that slider is anywhere remotely close to the zone at mid 90s, I mean, you're just helpless as a batter. One of those first strikeouts that you saw in that first outing was against Wilson Contreras, and he just flailed at a slider on the outside of the zone that wasn't even close to the zone, and just made him look silly. Now you go to yesterday, and like you said, the fastball was down just a couple ticks. And when you're talking, 102 down to like 98, like that's actually a pretty big difference for major league hitters. He started off right around 100, and then it kind of came down in the third and fourth inning. But the slider, and I think Levering was the one who mentioned it on the broadcast. I'm trying to remember who was on it yesterday. The slider just was not cutting. It did not have the sideways movement that it normally does. The one in particular that the Grand Slam was hit off of, they said almost looked like a cutter that barely cut, as opposed to a slider that's supposed to go way farther horizontally. So whether his grip was off, whether there's something literally weather-wise that was causing it, not sure. But you combine those two things with the command just being a little bit less yesterday, and that all kind of just combines to a poor outing. And he's going to have those as he's getting used to things and continuing to refine his control. Let's not forget, it really wasn't until this year at AAA that he started dialing in and not walking nearly as many people. And so he's gonna, because he's just starting to get used to being that under control, he's going to have games where he's still not. And so that's okay. It's his rookie season. He's still going to be phenomenal. We're just going to have to go with the bumps in the road, and the Brewers are going to let him learn.
Other pitching, Freddie Peralta has looked, it's kind of the same where his pitch counts get high, but somehow went through 6 innings yesterday. And Quintana's control's been up and down. They get Woody coming back Sunday against Miami. The rest of the pitching rotation and then the bullpen seems to be a bit of a struggle at times lately, especially starting pitching. Overall, been good. What's your overall take on the pitching?
I honestly think it's actually been pretty solid ever since that first, couple weeks of the month. They have moved up into the top half of the league in ERA of from a total pitching staff perspective. I think some of the guys who weren't necessarily performing well, you saw guys at the beginning of the season like Elvin Rodriguez. We've moved on from him. Aaron Savali has been traded. Brian Hudson, it's crazy that he hasn't been able to recapture what he had kind of in the first half of last year, but he's been out and I believe hurt at this point. I think he might have been back for a little bit now. Craig Yoho was a guy that we thought could, really show some things, but wasn't quite ready for the moment. He's now been just like lights out at AAA. So he'll be back at some point. But outside of that, it seems like the starting rotation is finally kind of settled in after all those injuries that made the Brewers kind of had to keep patching it and trying different things. And because of that, we got to see Chad Patrick early, who's been really good, and Logan Henderson, who was even better, but there just wasn't room for him at the time. And then ultimately Jacob Mizorowski as well. The starting rotation seems to have really settled in. The bullpen kind of has its moments. I think McGill's still a very good closer. Abner Uribe, very good at setup. Jared Koenig, his ERA is a little high, but he's still by and large performs very well for the Brewers. It's kind of everything outside of that still trying to see what you have. But I think DL Hall and Aaron Ashby as long guys have come in and done very admirable jobs. Tyler Alexander was another guy I was thinking of who, we've moved on from at this point. Grant Anderson, I think, has been someone we definitely didn't expect to be as good as he was this year, and he's filled a great role for the Brewers. I think now I feel a lot more comfortable with the Brewers pitching staff. Now that kind of they've worked through the guys that they don't need to have there anymore. And that kind of happens all the time with the Brewers. Is they end up throwing a lot of things to see what sticks early and then settling into who their main guys are.
One pitcher you didn't mention, I want to get your thoughts, and he's a guy that when the move happened, you would have thought that they traded Yelich for a bucket of balls when they traded for Quinn Priester from the Red Sox. And obviously, early returns for Priester were woof. What did we do? But lately, he's just been one of the best pitchers in the rotation recently. And what has he done differently from Boston, Pittsburgh, first couple of starts till now?
Man, he's just been lights out with the Brewers. I think anytime you can get a talented pitcher out of Pittsburgh, you've got a chance to turn them into something. We've seen it happen with plenty of pitchers in the past, and Boston didn't really get a ton of time to end up working with him. So I don't know if they never really just got that chance to unlock him or what, or if they just had the offer they couldn't refuse. But with the Brewers really did kind of a couple things. They first really started, and they do this with everyone. Kurt Hogue for Journal Sentinel wrote a story about this, about how the Brewers are as fastball reliant more fastball reliant than any team in Major League Baseball. They have their pitchers lean into their fastballs and kind of have everything else work off of it. It might take the strikeout numbers down a little bit, but it's a recipe that's worked, as we can see. So they got Quinn Priester really comfortable with what he had in his different types of fastballs. Once they were able to do that, and you could see it was a little bit of a learning process in those first few starts, but once they got him really comfortable with that, that's when they started, bringing out the best of his secondary pitches. And it's funny because his curveball was rated as one of the best curveballs, one of the better curveballs in all of minor league sports as he was coming up the minor leagues. And he barely used it in those first few starts with the Brewers. Now you've seen him start to use it as a wipeout pitch, and it is very good. And so everything's kind of just coming together, but it just took the Brewers working with him for a little bit and kind of just fine-tuning some stuff. And look what they unlocked. And for, people who were upset about the move at the time, and understandable, the Brewers gave up one of their top prospects, a guy that Dave and I, with Cold Brew Podcast called untouchable last fall in Yoferi Rodriguez, as well as a recent draft pick. Yeah, at face value, that seemed like a concerning trade, but you got to give these things time. And now Priester's amazing. Rodriguez has not been great with the Red Sox. He's still very young. He's got plenty of time. But what seemed like kind of a move, almost more for the future with Priester, has now really started helping the present as well.
I think you give Chris Hook a lot of credit there with just how in tune he is with pitching in general. And I hope the Brewers can lock him up forever because I would hate to see him leave and go someplace else.
Mhm.
Brendan Woodworth. We talked about this last time I had you on, looking at Memorial Day ish return from his shoulder surgery, which we still don't know how that shoulder surgery. There's no track record of any pitcher coming back from it because there isn't really any history there. A lot of bad luck. I could go through
Mhm.
all the issues that he's had, ankle, line drive, whatever. But we be here all night. Now, pending him stubbing his toe, getting out of the shower, having a bicycle roll over his foot, finding a gopher hole, he is set to start on Sunday. What do we expect from Brandon Woodruff? And if any of those things happen, it's not my fault. What do we?
Exactly. Nope, I won't put that on you. I think for Brandon Woodruff, seeing how he's looked, in the minor leagues, and he's had outings that have ranged from a few innings to the one where he actually got hit with the line drive was a 7-inning outing where he had only given up either 0 or 1 runs. Like, it was a very good outing. I think we can set our expectations to be pretty darn close to normal for Brandon Woodruff. If anything, I watched his outing on, I believe it was Sunday, and his velocity he was sitting right at that, almost like 94, 95 with his fastball. When Brandon Woodruff's really cooking, it's more, 96, 97. So I don't think he's going to be at his absolute like top end velocity wise, but he's a good enough pitcher with good enough secondary pitches to still do fine, even if he's kind of sitting in the middle. So I think our expectations, if he can hit right around, he threw 82 pitches for AAA Nashville. So he's ready for a normal pitcher's workload. If he can hit, that 80 or so, 90 or so pitches in that outing and if he goes 5 innings coming back from a really bad shoulder surgery and hasn't pitched in well over a year, I think we should be absolutely happy with that. It might not look perfect, but if he can go 5, if he can be, eligible for the win, as they say, like an outing long enough for that, and even only give up a couple runs, 2 or 3 even, I would be ecstatic for him. Even if he gives up like 4, that's fine. He's back. He can build towards those things. He will improve his shoulder strength, which will lead to increased velocity, and just even closer to that Brandon Woodruff we're familiar with. So, if he lasts a normal 5 innings, absolutely fantastic. If he doesn't, it's fine. He will work his way there.
Big thing is don't overreact either direction. But the
Exactly.
question is, Priester's been outstanding. I know there's other reasons you don't want to send him down as well. Mizorowski, I know they mentioned that they don't want to yo-yo him back and forth once he's at the
Right.
majors there. Chad Patrick's had a good start recently, but he had faltered. Peralta, Quintana. Who's the odd man out in that rotation? It's got to be Chad Patrick, right?
Yeah, even coming into this weekend, my thoughts were that it would be, even before he went through the kind of 2 to 3 start rough stretch, I thought it would be Chad Patrick, strictly due to kind of seniority and position on the totem pole, so to say. But then he went through a little bit of that rough stretch, and obviously that almost sealed the deal a little bit more. He did bounce back, ironically, on the same day that Brandon Woodruff pitched on Sunday. And because of kind of the double header and how they want to keep everyone's rest days the same, Chad Patrick will actually get one more start tomorrow. Today is Thursday, Saturday, I believe, before Woodruff goes. So it might be a little bit until they have to send him down, or maybe that ends up being the corresponding move for Sunday. But I do think it's Chad Patrick, and that's absolutely nothing bad on Chad Patrick. Like, he's had a great rookie season. I've seen him as high as top 3 for rookie of the year predictions in the National League until Mizorowski busted out. But they're going to he is absolutely going to be a part of the Brewers' future. And so the important part is going to be keeping him on a regular rotation of starts down there at AAA. It's not like they're just going to take Chad Patrick and move him to the bullpen while Woodruff comes back. No, they want him ready. And that could be for this year. We've already seen what injuries have done to the Brewers rotation. Absolutely, you could see a guy pull a hammy and be out for a couple weeks or something like that. So I do think it'll be Patrick, but I think is a big part of the Brewers team, and we will see plenty more of him in the future.
Well, we're a little less than a month away from the trade deadline. The Brewers three games out of first currently, I believe. With the if they win, they'll think it's 2.5 out of first. Currently 3 out of first. Wild card is theirs currently. I have the opinion of just let this season play out. Don't sell the farm to get a rental here, because realistically, are you really going to run the table once the playoffs start? So I would rather just play the season out, see how it finishes, and let the young guys continue to grow. What do you think? Well, 3 parts here. What do you think the Brewers are going to do? Actually, 2 parts. What do you think the Brewers are going to do, and what do you want to see the Brewers do?
I would like to see them bring in another bat, just because I do still worry about the offense being inconsistent down the stretch. We don't want to see that happen, and then they put themselves in a position where they get a little too far out and start pressing somewhat. So I would like to see them add a bat to that lineup. Could be a fourth outfielder. It could be another infielder. Who knows? I'd be interested to see. I think they can make some moves while still kind of dealing some expired contracts along with some prospects. I wouldn't be surprised if they traded Cortez because he hits free agency, and I honestly don't know how he fits in the roster once he comes back. Yeah, I'm completely baffled by that one. That a great problem to have. Don't get me wrong. And if Mizorowski happened, I know they don't want to yo-yo him, but if he had a couple, more blow-up starts, then maybe that would kind of work itself out. But I think that's one you could look at. I think you've talked about Rhys Hoskins in the past, but I don't see how you can deal Rhys Hoskins and come out of the trade deadline with your offense being better. So I guess I would personally try to stray away from that one. But I think there are some assets between major leaguers and minor leaguers where you could make some things happen. So we'll see. But I would like to see them bring in another bat. Another high leverage arm wouldn't hurt as well to throw in the mix with McGill, Uribe, and Koenig.
What do you think the Brewers do?
I think it ends up being kind of some mix of that. We've seen that kind of from them recently, where they do this kind of hybrid model of buying and selling. But it also all depends on what happens here in the month of June. They're right there in the thick of things. They're in a wild card spot. If they are still there, they will make the moves to try and win the division, or at the very least secure playoff spots. But I don't think they do anything too terribly crazy, because this is a team with a good young core, and it's you don't, outside of a couple of the veterans mentioned earlier, not really a lot of those young guys that you want to necessarily just go and get rid of right now. So I think they stay relatively pat and deal from, like I said, some of those expiring contracts and minor leaguers. They have a great minor league. They have a lot of assets in that minor league system. So they've got a lot to work with, but I don't think they end up with a lot of big, sexy moves again. And some people might want them to. But I mean, the Brewers are where they are. Like you said, 10 games over 500. They're in a playoff spot. They're right behind the Cubs. They're in position to do something.
Last question before I let you go. Keeping tab with the trade deadline here. You mentioned one of your untouchables went to bring Quinn Priester to Milwaukee. Who are your untouchables currently? I'm sure you don't have to go through every single one if it's an extensive list, but who are your current untouchables in the minor leagues that if a team were to call on, you're hanging up on them?
For sure. I would go with 3 right now, and that's a lot of untouchables to have. And one's kind of even a borderline is Jesus Made, absolutely untouchable. The way they talk about him, could potentially be a next Jackson Churio, and that is obviously very, very high praise. Luis Pena, some like him more than Made right now, and so he's another guy who absolutely do not deal currently. And then one of the same guys that I had as last year, Cooper Pratt, has absolutely the looks of being a elite defensive level shortstop with enough hitting to be an everyday guy at the big leagues. And I think there are maybe just some tiny questions with the bat where maybe if you got a good enough offer, you could consider dealing him. So he like maybe you could be convinced on that one. But for me, I like him enough where he's untouchable for me.
Well, I lied. I do have one more question.
All right.
I was looking at your X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, before we started the show, and you tweeted out, "quote If you aren't familiar with Coleman Crow, start getting familiar."
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about him? Because I love pitching, so I want to know about pitching.
Yeah. Coleman Crow is, for those who don't remember, he is who the Brewers traded for when they traded Tyrone Taylor and Adrian Hauser to the Mets last year. They traded for him knowing that he would be out for an entire year due to Tommy John surgery. But they loved what they saw in him and the potential that he had enough to trade for him anyway. He was the only part of that trade that the Brewers got when they traded away Taylor and Hauser. He sat out for Tommy John. He was in Arizona Fall League last fall and, was able to kind of start getting some reps and building himself up. And now this year he started down in Double-A. Very good. Was the Brewers minor league pitcher of the month last month in June, and now is up in Triple-A and had a scoreless 4-inning outing for the Sounds tonight. He is a guy who he has one of those big like Clayton Kershaw-esque curveballs. I'm not saying it's as good as it, but it's that that big sweeping type that is super fun to watch. And enough, obviously, other pitches to go along with it to where he does really well against opposing hitters. So he's a guy that when we traded for him, we talked about on the podcast about like this is a 2025 consideration for the Brewers. He could be a part of the Brewers' future. It just won't be until he actually gets back on the mound, and he's looked good. He's still young. He's another one who will be in the mix for the future for the Brewers.
And then finally, you mentioned Clayton Kershaw. He did something yesterday that 3,000 career strikeouts, and he did something that I had tweeted out earlier regarding it, and I've been saying this is, do we see another 3,000 strikeout pitcher anytime soon, or if at all? Because I think Chris Sale is the closest one, and he seemed to be hurt a lot. Do we see another 3,000 pitcher?
Yeah, I don't know. That is tough considering it's not only like battling through injuries with as high-powered, high-octane as pitchers are these days. Like you were getting at, more of a chance for injuries. We know that starting pitchers don't go as deep into ball games anymore. It's hard. I don't know that we ever do, to be totally honest with you. And you know what? It's still fun. Like, even though they don't go deep into games, it is still fun to watch starting pitchers these days because of just how absurdly talented they are and how hard they throw and how ridiculous they can make hitters look. We've got a guy who devotes his entire life pitching ninja to just filthy pitchers. He has a whole account that people are just like locked into. That's how amazing pitching is these days. So it's great for the sport in that sense. But I don't think we ever see a 3,000. And that's just, sports go through different eras, and we're in this era now. And that's kind of the reality of it. And that's okay.
Well, appreciate you coming on. It's been great talking to you. One last plug for your stuff, and then we can call it a show.
Absolutely. Again, write about all of MLB over at Just Baseball. Write about the Brewers over at Athlon Sports. You can follow them at Athlon Brewers on Twitter or X. And then Inside the Brewers you can find them online. And then Dave and I, like I said, at the Cold Brew Podcast. We've been going since 2020. and not stopping anytime soon.
Well, again, appreciate you coming on, and look forward to continuing to read your stuff and listen to your pod. And appreciate you coming on, and have a fun 4th of July.
Yeah, you as well, everyone out there. Get through the weekend with your 10 toes and your 10 fingers and enjoy the holiday.
Thank you. Well, this has been Talking Sports with Evan, Brew Talk, as I titled it. Find the podcast version first thing tomorrow morning, anywhere you get your podcast, and you can always watch the live streams on X at Evan with Sports, as well as on YouTube and Facebook, Talking Sports with Evan. And I know YouTube is now taking down videos. I'm sorry, Facebook is now taking down videos, live videos after so many days and so many months. So YouTube, they're there forever. But thank you, and I'll get back at it next week talking sports with you.